Okay, good morning, colleagues. How are you doing? I would like to say thank you very much for coming out and for being with us today. My name is Michelle Stewart McCoy, and I am one of the faculty educational developers here in the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning. And we are here to discuss the whole matter of demystifying artificial intelligence, talking about ChatGPT and the other artificial intelligence platforms and software that exist. We know that this is quite a disruption, and in the words of Professor Michael Taylor, this is one of the second major disruptions to teaching and learning, with the first being COVID-19. And we still have not forgotten the impact of COVID-19 and how much it has impacted our systems. Why are we here? We're here because the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning has become an active voice, one of the voices in the discussion of the whole matter of teaching and learning and these disruptive technologies. And we also are presenting this particular forum as a part of our Teaching Emphasis Days, which is a subset of our celebration of 30 glorious years of faculty development. And so before I go any further, let me say that the forum is being brought to you as a collaborative activity between the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning and the Office of Online Learning, the Mona campus. And as such, I am one of your hosts, Michelle Stewart McCoy. The other is Charmaine McKenzie, Dr. Charmaine McKenzie, who you meet in a few. Before I go any further, let me welcome our manager, Dr. Mervyn Chisholm, who will bring greetings, a welcome, and a basic overview of our activities. Dr. Chisholm?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mrs. Stewart McCoy. And thank you also to your erstwhile colleague, Dr. McKenzie. So welcome, colleagues, one and all, to this session. I'm seeing some very familiar faces, and I'm honored to be associated with this panel discussion on ChatGPT. We are seeking to demystify this disruption in education and look at implications for the Caribbean. So I'd like to extend really cordial welcome to you all from the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning. We are celebrating 30 years of service to the Mona campus, and we are very proud that the CETL Mona is the first center for teaching and learning in the Caribbean, the first faculty development center, as far as we know, in the Anglophone Caribbean. And we hope that we will be able to serve our campus and the wider Caribbean for many, many more years to come. Mrs. Stewart McCoy and Dr. Charmaine McKenzie have planned a wonderful session for us. We have invited a number of guests, and I'd like to recognize the persons who will be the participants or the speakers in this panel discussion. In this first session, Dr. Perkins, Anna Perkins from the office, the Quality Assurance Office, Dr. Patrick Anglin, who is our data officer, the UWI data officer, and we have from the Commonwealth of Learning, the Vice President, Dr. Venkataraman Balaji. I hope I got that right, Dr. VP. And then later on, we're going to have Dr. Chantal Moore from the School of Education, Professor Daniel Kaur from the Department of Computing, Dr. Nadine Maitland from the University of Technology, and Mrs. Shellon Samuels White from the Micro University. She will speak to us as well. I think Mrs. Shalon White, Samuels White, wrote a lovely column for Faculty Focus recently, and I was really inspired. So I'm looking forward to listening to you, Mrs. Samuels White. So welcome, colleagues, and I trust we will have a wonderful session. Mrs. Stewart McCall, back to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chisholm. Thank you ever so much. Now, before we get into the meat of the matter and the exciting aspect, let us just talk a little bit about the background. Now, as you know, since the launch of artificial intelligence, especially the prompt generators such as ChatGPT in November 2022, there's been a lot of excitement, anxiety, and concern about the implications, as well as the implications for other AI generative softwares and platforms, especially as it relates to education, the teaching and learning context. In tertiary education, these perspectives have ranged from those of the technophile, those who fear or abhor the technologies, to the Luddite who have been embracing it. So as researchers, educators, and so forth, we must find a way to balance the two extremes. The University of the West Indies has been paying attention to the worldwide discourse, and since March, we have hosted a number of initiatives related to AI and ChatGPT. The institution has also issued releases and helpful resources, thus pointing to the institution's position. This particular panel discussion, which comes out of the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning, will present perspectives on ethical issues of AI and generative AI systems, data protection, and important open source efforts in training models that will better assist us. Of course, we have to consider, we cannot dismiss the whole matter of ethics and the sensitivity to this particular context. So the discussion is concentrated on teaching and learning and assessment in higher education within the Caribbean and within the region. And therefore, we will be pulling on experiences from our researchers or facilitators while we examine how best we can demystify these AI platforms and software, including ChatGPT, Learned AI, the rest of the AI crew. Okay, so these are the ones that are currently in the spotlight. Of course, you have heard who our panel members are: Dr. Anna Perkins, Dr. Anglin, and these two will be bringing us perspectives from the ethical aspect and data protection and so forth. Dr. V. Balaji, I will not attempt to pronounce the name, sir, who comes from the Commonwealth of Learning and brings to us a broader perspective of what is happening in these countries. Dr. Chantal Moore will be bringing an educational aspect hailing from the Faculty of Humanities and Education. And of course, we have Professor Daniel Kaur, who comes from the Science and Technology faculty, who has been doing quite a bit of work and has been on panels discussing the place, the role of the university as it relates to ChatGPT and other AI platforms. We'd also have from, as you would have heard, the University of Technology and the Michael University voices that will add to the Caribbean perspective, and our own Leighton Ellis from the Faculty of Engineering. So we are expecting quite a bit of discussion and eye-opening comments so that we can advance our position and policy where this new tool, this disruption is concerned. So I'm going to turn it over to my co-host, Charmaine McKenzie, to continue with the conversation as we prepare for the first speaker.
Thank you, Mrs. Stewart McCoy. I am just so happy to see so many people in attendance at our forum. And I hope the numbers will continue to grow as we go along. The first person on our program is Dr. Anna Perkins, who is a Senior Program Officer at the Quality Assurance Unit, Office of the Board for Undergraduate Studies here at UWI Mona. Dr. Perkins is not here live, but we certainly have a very lively submission, a recorded submission and presentation that she sent, and that is what we will start off with. She is looking at the ethical aspects of AI in higher education in the Caribbean, and it's a very interesting presentation that she submitted.
Hi everyone, thanks to the Office of Online Learning and the Center for Excellence in Teaching and Learning for the invitation to contribute to this discussion on demystifying AI in higher education with a focus on the Caribbean. The Office of the Board for Undergraduate Studies under PVC BUS, Professor Justin Robinson, has been leading the discussion at the level of policy on matters of AI and higher education. This is in keeping with UWI's commitment to remaining agile and responsive to changes in the technological, educational, occupational, and human development landscape. Many of you would have seen this particular email, which was sent out to the UWI community several times during the month of May from the PVC BUS. It was an invitation to us to think through the implications of ChatGPT for our work. It was accompanied by a very useful UNESCO Quick Start Guide, which featured a cover image designed by DALL-E 2, the AI system that can produce very realistic images based on textual instructions. In this instance, DALL-E 2 was asked to produce an impressionist image of what artificial intelligence would look like if it were a person going to university. And I kind of found the image intriguing. It showed a woman of color, perhaps a woman of Asian descent. And I found myself asking, what ideas behind our higher education, technology, and gender are expressed in that particular image? If we have time later on, it might be a fun task, just sort of discussing what that is all about, yeah? One of the other things that PVC Robinson has done is that he has hosted a Vice Chancellor's Forum on AI and higher education, blessing or curse. And the panel that was a part of that particular forum included persons from UNESCO, persons from Turnitin, and from our own CXC. Among the issues that were noted as potential was the potential for AI to contribute meaningfully to the improvement of higher education, and at the same time, the need for us to be cautious in depending on information as produced by such systems. At the level of the campuses, we know all kinds of things are going on. Discussions are already in train around AI, and I think of the one which was hosted by the Faculty of Sci-Tech at Mona sometime in March. And it set out the kind of dreaded, sort of either or scenario, asking whether AI was a threat or opportunity. And I hope that you would agree with me, as would have been one of the outcomes of that particular discussion, that we need not set it up as an either or situation, but recognizing that there is both benefit and challenge present in the rapid transformation that come from engaging with artificial intelligence in our higher education space. Now, as a member of the Quality Assurance Unit, I'm located in this center, and we've been taking a very active interest in the nature and the purpose and the implications of AI for teaching, learning, outreach, and research here at UWI. We're really, really excited by the potential for AI to be integrated at all levels of our quality management system, guided by our quality policy, which we know itself calls out for revision, considering these rapid developments in the field of AI. My specific mandate to you today, after that very long sort of introduction, is to speak to key ethical issues around AI and AI generative systems, as well as those aspects that are meaningful to our learning environment here in the Caribbean. I was taken by a comment that was made by one of the panelists at the Vice Chancellor's Forum on AI and higher education. Her name was Patty West Smith, and she's the director of the customer engagement team at Turnitin. And she asked this question. She said, if we don't give students the guardrails around how to use these tools effectively and ethically, who will? In many cases, they will create their own ethics and ethos around what is appropriate and ethical. And I think we all know that can lead to some challenges, end quote. Now for me, when she says some challenges, I think she borders on the understatement, but she's making a really key point, which frames the contribution that I'm making today. Her comment highlights one aspect of the ethical call on us here at UWI as we respond to the challenge and opportunity of AI in higher education. How are we preparing our students to effectively and ethically use AI? Before I get there, however, of course, we need to do a bit more around what are the ethical issues that are a part of the AI in higher education revolution. Now, I've never used ChatGPT myself. I've participated in various fora discussing the implications for higher education, particularly one that was focused on my academic specialty, theology. I've read a little bit, and I've contributed to drafting a policy document entitled Artificial Intelligence, The Way Forward, which is coming to various boards for consideration and discussion very soon. And I realized, this is the perfect opportunity for me to get my feet wet and to model a bit of what I was thinking and learning about. So of course, you know what I did. I set up an OpenAI account and I fed ChatGPT some prompts based on my 2 key questions. So what I'm going to do now is to share with you the content of the ChatGPT responses to my prompts, which will allow me to highlight the issues inherent in the use of such machine technologies that mimic human cognitive abilities. Now, I did this after very carefully reading the UNESCO Quick Start Guide, which I found to be very useful, especially this flowchart, which helps us to think about when it's safe for us to use ChatGPT. And of course, not just ChatGPT, but any of the other kind of AI technologies that are available. So when I used that flowchart and I followed it carefully, I found that I could honestly and safely answer yes, that I had the expertise to verify the output as accurate, and that I was willing to take full responsibility for any missed inaccuracies in the output generated that I'm going to share with you this morning. I concluded that it was safe for me to use the tool as long as I was very careful and I checked every word and every sentence and ensured that I understood what they meant and that I was okay with what they were saying, to share that with you. Overall, what's my assessment on the ChatGPT technologies, the version of it that's available to us free online at the moment? Well, I found the output to be pretty reliable, if a bit bland. I'd like a bit more sort of color in the writing, but that's not there. That's what the human agent, such as myself, who will inject her personality into the writing and so on. So bland but serviceable, bland but useful. So I started off with 2 prompts, right? That is, I gave ChatGPT two textual instructions that I wanted it to give me a response to. So A, I said, what are the key ethical issues around AI and AI generative systems? And B, I asked, what aspects impact UWI and the Caribbean region? So those are going to be put up on the slides as we continue. And what I've done is that on every slide that I reflect what ChatGPT shared with me, I put the ChatGPT logo there so that it's an indication of the source. Now, ChatGPT, which is meant to be sort of conversational, started off by saying quite correctly, AI and AI generative systems raise several key ethical issues. And then it says, here are some of the prominent ones. And it pointed out about bias and discrimination. It pointed about privacy and surveillance. It talked about accountability and transparency. And as I read through those responses that I got from putting in my first prompt, I realized, wow, I made my prompt way too general. I'm interested in AI and higher education, not just AI and AI generative systems generally. And so I had to then recalibrate and rework the prompt that I put in to specify that I was interested in higher education and AI. And that's a key point that we need to remember when we're deploying these tools. We get better results from them when we engage with presenting them with what they call golden prompts, prompts that are carefully specified, giving them clear parameters so that these generative systems can respond and give us the information that we're looking for. So what did I do? I refined my first prompt to say, what are the key ethical issues around AI and AI generative systems in higher education? And this generated a much more specific answer that I found to be worthwhile. So again, in its very conversational way, ChatGPT first stated to me, and I'm quoting ChatGPT here, the integration of AI in higher education raises several key issues, key ethical issues. Here are some of the prominent ones. And in doing so, it more carefully specified the general ethics concerns with AI for the higher education environment. So here's what it said. It started out with issues of privacy and data protection in higher education. So it said, AI systems in higher education often collect and process large amounts of personal data from students, faculty, and staff. So ensuring privacy and data protection is crucial to prevent unauthorized access, misuse, or breaches. And so institutions must establish robust data protection policies, consent mechanisms, and security measures to safeguard personal information. And I'm sure you're all aware of the work of our own Dr. Patrick Anglin, a university data protection officer, who is also on today's panel, who has been doing quite a bit of work in getting us to understand matters of privacy and data protection. And I'm sure he's going to say a bit more about that today in his presentation. So in that regard, we can say that UWI has certainly started on the road to responding effectively to AI in higher education by taking account of the ethical challenges around issues of privacy and data protection and so on. Then ChatGPT's talked to me a little bit about bias and fairness. And it pointed out that AI algorithms can be influenced by biases that are present in the data that they're trained on. And this can lead to unfair outcomes. It suggests that in higher education, biased AI systems can affect admissions, it can affect how we grade our students, it can affect the academic support that we provide to students, and this will result in unequal opportunities for certain individuals or certain groups. And so institutions are called upon, therefore, to address this bias through diverse and representative data training, algorithmic auditing, and ongoing monitoring. And I have noted, as I did before about that image that DALL-E 2 generated of AI going to university. And it makes me wonder, if we were to give DALL-E 2 the prompt to say, AI going to university in the Caribbean, what would that look like? Would it look like me? Meaning that it would take account of an African descended woman, a woman, because most of our enrollees in UWI, for example, tend to be women. You know, what groups would the image under or misrepresent? So remember, AI can and it does reflect back at us our own biases, and we need to be aware of that. What about transparency and explainability? So ChatGPT was saying to me, look, AI systems in higher education can be complex and opaque. So, you know, how do you get behind and into that black box? And so this opaqueness makes it difficult for us to understand how decisions are made. And remember, we are clear that decisions especially from the perspective of quality assurance and from the perspective of ethics, that decisions must be data driven and they must certainly be transparent and accountable. Yeah. So lack of transparency can undermine trust and it can hinder accountability. So institutions should strive for this transparency and this explainability in the use of AI systems so that it can enable its students and its stakeholders to understand the factors that influence these decisions, decisions such as who do we provide a scholarship to, or who do we admit to the university of the numerous persons that are applying to get into Mona and so on. How do we make those decisions if we're going to be using AI technologies? Now, I buck up on this word explainability coming to me from ChatGPT, and for me that's such an awkward term. Never know what it means, so I had to go figure it out. And what I understood from looking up explainability is that it's the idea that a concept, that a machine learning model like ChatGPT is going to present output to us, that output can be explained in a way that makes sense to a human being at an acceptable level. So that's what explainability is about. Anything that the system generates, we must be able to understand it at a general level as a human being. Otherwise, there's an issue in and of itself, because then the decision is not as transparent, not as explainable as it ought to be. And we need to be able to explain our decisions. What's the basis on which these decisions are made? So when I look on, I see a very important role here, certainly for us in quality assurance, no doubt, given that our systems ought to be transparent and our systems ought to be data driven and so on. I also see here a significant role for our university internal audit function and our risk management team as well, because there are significant risks that are inherent to the use of AI technologies for our processes and procedures. And so they, like us, will have to get up to speed on how they can undertake AI audits and risk manage AI and so on, so that this particular challenge can be addressed. What about equity and inclusivity? ChatGPT again says to us, AI applications should consider and mitigate existing inequalities in higher education. So, for example, AI is used in admissions, but it should not perpetuate socioeconomic, racial, or gender biases, right? So institutions should assess the impact of using AI on equity and inclusivity, ensuring fair access to resources and opportunities, and mitigate any disparities that can arise from AI implementation. And we know that there has been drafted, at least for the Mona campus, an equity, diversity, and inclusion policy. And such a policy and what it means for how we utilize AI in all the different systems and processes and mechanisms that are a part of our UWI, so that people are not kept out of accessing the resources of the university and so on. Really, really important that we find ways of ensuring that our policies around D-I&E are reflected in how our use of AI functions. Then we can talk about and note too that a lot of these issues are interrelated, so they don't stand alone. So here, for example, ChatGPT is talking about the ethical use of student data. It ties back into the question and concern about data privacy and so on, which we would have looked at earlier. But ChatGPT flagged in particular an issue around how to use student data in an ethical fashion. And they say that, student data is collected through AI systems, but those data that are collected should be used for legitimate educational purposes and not be exploited for commercial or unethical practices. And so the institution should have clear policies regarding the collection, storage, and use of student data, ensuring that it is used responsibly and in compliance with relevant laws and regulations. And again, I point us back to the work of our own Dr. Anglin, who has been working really assiduously to ensure that we understand data protection and data usage. And of course, this is not something new necessarily, because we do know that the UWI does have very strict rules about student data and the use of student data and how we access that. So for example, if someone is doing a piece of research and wants to have access to student data so that they can speak to the kinds of students that there are at UWI and so on, they can't just get access to that information. The policies and procedures that are overseen by the campus registrar's office, for example, would kick in here. And then again, tied into this, and this is part of the reason I say that I found ChatGPT's output to be very useful, to be very helpful in this particular instance, because it then flagged up student well-being and mental health. And I know that for many of us, we're particularly concerned about student well-being and mental health, generally speaking, because for many students, the learning environment of the higher education space can be particularly stressful. But we know that coming out of the pandemic experience, that's become an even more important element for us to keep our eyes on. I know, and I'm thinking of it too, because in a week or so we're going to be looking at a review of our university health services, and I know that this is one of the areas that the health services has been providing your man, your woman service with little resources, or certainly, as we know, with many of our UWI spaces, not sufficient resources. So what did ChatGPT have to say about student well-being and mental health? It says, AI systems that provide student support services, for example, chatbots or virtual assistants, should prioritize student well-being and mental health. So you know that there are AI systems where we have interfaces. So you can think of our student helpline calling into our health services to get some assistance when students are feeling depressed or feeling suicidal or so on. Not just any chatbot can assist in a space like that. And usually these chatbots will gather responses from the person engaging with them before being able to channel them into a conversation with a human person, should there be that need. Or were we to institute such a chatbot, for example, in that particular space, we have to ensure that that chatbot is trained in such a way that it will recognize and prioritize where students are really under stress and needing particular and peculiar, perhaps even urgent responses to what they express and so on. So we really should ensure that our AI tools are designed to handle sensitive information with empathy and refer students for appropriate human support and so on in a timely fashion, right? When necessary. And regular monitoring and evaluation should be conducted to assess the impact of AI on student well-being. Goes without saying. Now, ChatGPT flagged up again for us academic integrity. And usually, when we talk about AI in higher education, this is the first place that we go to, academic integrity, because many of us fear that the AI revolution is putting academic integrity in jeopardy. So here's what ChatGPT says, that the use of AI in assessments and plagiarism detection, so note for example, in the Vice Chancellor's Forum, there was Patty West-Smith, a representative of Turnitin, and we know that technologies like Turnitin are rapidly trying to keep up with ChatGPT and others so that they can detect when output is generated by AI rather than generated simply by the efforts of a student or a faculty member or so on. So the use of AI in assessments and plagiarism detection brings forth all kinds of challenges that are related to academic integrity. And institutions such as UWI should establish clear guidelines and policies to address the ethical implications of AI in preventing and detecting plagiarism. So students also should be educated about AI tools and how to use them and the limitations of these tools in order for us to maintain academic integrity. So, as I've mentioned to you before, this tends to be the area of focus in much of the discussion and much of the fear that there is around AI in higher education. And it leads in some instances to an outright banning of the use of ChatGPT in some institutions. But, with this rapid advancement in technology, it tells us that the horse has already gone through the gate and we're wasting time in trying to restrict. What we need to do is to stop trying to hold back the tide, but rather to go with the tide while using that tide to get to where we want to go. So we need to be on top of the revolution. We need to understand it better. We need to know how to make it work for us. We need to know how to make it work so that our students can be improved and be better students for having interacted with, and not see it perhaps as another opportunity to do less work, as some of our students have the tendency to do, or even some of our faculty have the tendency to do as well. As human beings, we're oftentimes looking for the easiest way out to do something, and sometimes that means that we err on the side of being unethical. ChatGPT also talks about ethical AI governance, and tells us that institutions should establish mechanisms for responsible AI governance in higher education, and that this involves developing policies, codes of conduct, guidelines for ethical development, deployment, and use of AI systems. They talk too about regular ethical assessments and audits. Did mention those before, particularly in the context of the work of our internal auditing function and so on, and that these audits should be conducted to ensure compliance and to identify potential issues. So again, the framework is there at UWI pretty well, because we have moved into the space of prioritizing risk management. And in fact, even in our QAU context, we are developing and responding to a risk-based assessment, a risk-based approach to quality assurance, so that we can make better and more considered contributions, knowing the fiscal constraints, recognizing the robustness and the maturity of our internal quality assurance systems and so on. So you can see that there's some magnificent dovetailing of the risk management move with the AI move, with the quality assurance move and so on, that promises to bear magnificent fruit in the future, so long as we work along and are well prepared for it. So it made me think too, I said, wait a minute, we got together QAU and drafted at the PVC's guidance this policy on AI and the way forward and so on. I said, you know what? We probably should have asked ChatGPT to do a first draft for us of this policy, giving us an opportunity as a unit to work with the AI assisted technologies, and again to model how it is that we would deploy such technologies in effective and ethical ways. It might have been a missed opportunity on this point, in this particular instance, but I can just moving forward in a more effective and ethical way using AI. So, all right. So I want to move on to my second prompt. When I asked ChatGPT about the specifics related to UW and the Caribbean, ChatGPT said to me, AI ethics has several implications for the University of the West Indies and the Caribbean region. Here are some aspects that are worth considering. And then it listed out 6 specific areas. So let's walk through them again. It listed out education and research. And it said, UWI plays a crucial role in shaping the education and research landscape in the Caribbean. UWI can incorporate AI ethics in its curriculum, ensuring that students are equipped with a strong understanding of the ethical implications of AI. And this can include courses on AI ethics, responsible AI development, and discussion of the social impact of AI. And I said, yes, because I immediately saw this specifically dovetailing with the foundation that we already have in place when we look at what we call the graduate characteristics. So we talk about or distinctive graduate for the 21st century. And we have a whole list of characteristics that we say someone that graduates from UWI should demonstrate. And one of these characteristics is being ethically aware and ethically sensitive and so on. So that gives us the imperative to think through and to work on and to embed the ethical use of AI and to form our students and our staff, because we are also concerned with staff who are distinctive and ethically grounded as well. So our academic framework should, in many ways, the guidelines and code of ethics and in the courses that we do, help to form students and staff who are really ethically sensitive and are sensitive therefore about how to use AI effectively and ethically. And we really have to consider how to incorporate those into the learning experience of our students. How do we incorporate those in how we assess? How do we incorporate those into how we admit students and so on? Then it pointed out about data bias and representation, and it says, oh look, the Caribbean has its unique cultural, social and historical context. And then it jumps off from that to say, when developing AI systems, it's essential to address potential biases in training data that might lead to unfair outcomes for marginalized communities in the region. And it says UWI can contribute to research efforts that can focus on understanding and mitigating biases in AI systems and ensuring fair representation and inclusivity. And I agree with that 100%. There are some peculiarities that are a part of the Caribbean region, part of our experience, part of our history, part of who we are. And so we should do the research about ourselves. We should do the research such that we can point out and put in place effective systems to mitigate data bias and misrepresentation that can show up because of the peculiarities of our Caribbean space. Then again, tied back into concerns with data privacy and data protection, it pointed out about the use of large data sets, including personal information. So you see how it's wrapping back into and tying us back to the general sort of ethical concerns that are there in AI in higher education generally. But what ChatGPT pointed out specific to UWI is that UWI has a role in raising awareness about privacy rights and data protection in the context of AI applications. And it speaks about how UWI can work on research and policy initiatives to develop guidelines and best practices for handling personal data in AI projects and ensuring compliance with regional data protection regulations and so on. And won't say much more about that because I know Dr. Anglin again will pick up on that and do a bit more in-depth dive for our consideration. It then pointed us to socioeconomic impacts, and talked about how AI had the potential to reshape industries and employment patterns, which can impact the Caribbean's workforce and economy. So it then says, UWI, we can engage in research on the specific implications of AI for the Caribbean job market and develop programs to support the upskilling and the reskilling of the workforce. And this can help individuals adapt to the change in job landscape and mitigate potential socioeconomic inequalities. And again, this is pointing to something that UWI is committed to, because that's the nature of UWI and what we were created to do, to support regional development. And so the ChatGPT is asking us again just to be aware of our mission and our vision and how much who we are as a university supporting the Caribbean have a responsibility to ensure that we mitigate and prepare for and guide and all of those different things to ensure that the socioeconomic impacts that can come from using AI in higher education are effective and don't do more harm than good to all the people that come into our spaces and come out of here educated to go into the workforce and have the sort of relevant skills and characteristics and so on that are needed. But UWI should constantly be scanning the environment and evaluating the impact of AI and so on, so that we can be ahead of the game. ChatGPT also pointed me to cultural preservation, and it again talked about our rich cultural heritage, and it pointed out that this rich cultural heritage needs to be preserved and respected in the development and deployment of AI technologies. And I said, yay, you get it. So UE again is called upon to collaborate with local communities, organizations, and policymakers to ensure that all AI systems respect and promote Caribbean cultural values, cultural traditions, and practices. Yeah? And this can involve developing guidelines for AI developers to consider cultural sensitivity and avoid cultural appropriation and misappropriation. And that means that we're going to have to be constantly in dialogue with the spaces that develop AI technologies that we're using. And we have to be constantly in dialogue to ensure that the material, that the data sets that are used to train these AI systems don't continue to marginalize us as a region, that they don't continue to misappropriate and misrepresent and so on who we are as Caribbean people, and that we recognize that we have an important role to contribute to ensuring that the AI technologies that enter into our higher education space respect and regard and take account of our Caribbean cultural traditions. Really, really important. Then finally, ChatGPT talked about policy and governance and mentioned UWI contributing to the development of AI policies and governance frameworks for our region. It pointed out that UWI can engage with policymakers, industry leaders, and civil society to address the ethical challenges posed by AI. And this conversation that we're having here is part of that contribution that UWI can make. There are some things about the process that UWI should be in the forefront of leading. There are some questions that we should ask. There's some questions that we should research and present answers to. And so a forum such as this one and so such as the other fora that I've mentioned to you before are exceedingly important and very much part of the contribution that UWI is making. So we're going to engage policymakers and industry leaders and members of civil society to address the ethical challenges that are posed by AI. And we can provide expertise, research findings, and recommendations to inform the formulation of AI policies that prioritize ethical considerations and protect the interests of our region. I think ChatGPT hit the nail on the head. Spot on. Prioritize ethical considerations while protecting the interests of the government and people of our region. Really important. Now, how does ChatGPT conclude? It concludes by saying, actively addressing AI ethics within its research, education, and policy initiatives, UWI, by doing this, UWI can help to shape a responsible and inclusive AI ecosystem in the Caribbean region, ensuring that AI technologies are developed and deployed in ways that align with the region's values and in ways that benefit the people of the Caribbean region. Let me close with a nonsense mnemonic to summarize what has been said about AI in higher education, specifically related to the Caribbean and UWI. So here's my silly mnemonic. Primrose showed up at the ER, called she pregnant bad. So I'll say it to you again. Primrose showed up at the ER, called she pregnant bad. Privacy, education and research, cultural preservation, policy and governance, and bias. Let's keep those in mind as we work with AI in higher education for the Caribbean in ways that are effective, but most certainly are ethical. Thank you very much.
Good. So You just heard from Dr. Perkins. So next we move on to Dr. Patrick Anglin, Data Protection Officer at the UWI. Just a reminder, panelists, to keep the time. I'll be watching. You're not seeing me, but I'm watching you. So please try and keep the time. We will signal. I'll signal if you are going over time. And persons who are here, please feel free to put any comments or questions you have in the chat.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, colleagues. Well, I hope you can see my PowerPoint.
Yes, we're seeing. Yes, we're seeing.
Fabulous. All right, so let me just go back a bit. So I'm going to just pick up from where Dr. Perkins left off with the ecosystem. But before I go there, I just want to indicate that I'll be zeroing in on the impact of AI on privacy more generally and data protection more specifically. But before I actually jump into my presentation, I just want to start by setting some boundaries, some definitional boundaries. What are we talking about when we speak about artificial intelligence? And I'm borrowing here from the Victorian Information Commissioner out of Australia. Very, very simple definition. And I'm sure that many of us know these things already, but it's good to have a working definition in mind as we proceed. So in its most simple phrasing, AI is really a field of computing with a goal of creating applications, programs that perform tasks that are generally performed by people. So I think we just need to accept that, because what is happening now is that AI seems to be taking over a lot of what people would normally do. But I want to move on, because we need to recognize that these AI systems, they have tremendous capacity. They can allow us to perform things much more quickly, much more widespread in terms of things like data processing, pattern recognition, decision making. And I want to focus my discussion on data processing, and specifically on the fact that AI systems can process large amounts of data in a short time, and specifically personal information related to the individual. And most of the time, this far surpasses the human capacity. And the level of efficiency is much greater than what we can do as humans. But importantly, the algorithms that AI use can extract insights, identify trends, discover patterns. And these patterns sometimes are difficult for us humans to detect. But in my talk about privacy, I want us, even though we recognize that privacy is very, very difficult to define. And when I'm speaking about privacy, I'm speaking about information related to the person that people don't necessarily want to share. Not necessarily speaking in the context of, for example, you having a shower and somebody bursting in and seeing you naked, because that is also an invasion of your privacy. Not talking about that. I'm talking about your information. And your information can be viewed as a continuum. I want us to think about privacy as a continuum. Within the context, the Caribbean context, the Jamaican context, the global context, there is some amount of information that nobody wants anybody to see. So access to that information is restricted to the individual. These are your secrets. These represent things that you share with only a very few people, if anybody at all. So that's one piece of the continuum. On the next end of the continuum would be information which is freely available about you. So a Google search can figure out that, listen, Patrick Anglin works at the University of the West Indies. He's data protection officer. But not everything about Patrick Anglin is on the internet, or should be. But then in the middle is where the difficulty lies, where this information, some of it is outside of the secrets that we hold. Some of it is available to organizations that we choose to share it with. And the recognition is that this information is what we really want to protect, both this information and the secret information that persons hold about themselves. So I want us to think about the continuum. It's very difficult to understand that, especially in this age where almost everything is public information. Persons tweet about everything they're doing, but this continuum still exists. And this continuum is a very good and useful tool that we want to use in our discourse. Now, when we speak about privacy, I want us to think about privacy as a fundamental human right. And that is a human right which really and truly safeguards how persons operate, your autonomy, your dignity. So that is what we talk about in the context. So in the Caribbean and global context, we recognize that privacy is a fundamental human right. And when your information is kept private, you have a greater sense of security. It allows boundary setting, and it allows you to manage information that you want to put out there. But privacy is essential in managing relationships, whether these relationships are personal, professional, or between an individual and an entity. It is the context that we operate. It provides control over your personal information. It allows persons to determine who gets access, how they get access, and when the information is used. So I want us to think about that. But it also enables us as individuals. We're very expressive in this part of the world. It allows us to express ourselves freely without fear. And sometimes we're saying things that we know are not true. But guess what? The things which are necessarily not true are our secrets. That makes us the same as anybody else, I assume. So privacy protects information, other types of information, your financial data, your medical records, your personal communications. So preserving it is critical to maintaining the healthy balance between the technological advancement and your rights and freedoms. Without it, we are subject to many things, such as profiling, discrimination, and manipulation. So I want us to think about that in terms of the discussion that we're going to be having. That is our context. We want some information to be held by us alone. We want some information to be held, for example, by our bank or our university alone. And we want some information to be in the open space. So, what are some of the dangers of AI to this that we're talking about? And one of the things,
5 minutes, Dr. Anglin.
one of the things that AI does is it collects information, large amounts of information, as Dr. Perkins mentioned a while ago. Much of what is happening now, especially with the chat GPTs, because these are large language models, these collect large amounts of data to learn. These don't necessarily exclude personal data. And much of this personal data is some of what we don't want persons to know about us. Some of our data, we try to hide the direct impact on us or the direct association to us. We anonymize the data. But AI allows us to be identified, to be de-anonymized. But the AI themselves are subject to security breaches. And what happens when, for example, a hacker breaks into an AI system? What happens then? The concepts of informed consent sometimes go missing in the AI space. And we have to think about this. Oftentimes, researchers are told that your research subjects must give you informed consent. You must be transparent. And sometimes with AI, you lose this. These days, almost everywhere there is a camera. And the AI behind it allows facial recognition. This can be a danger. And we have to think about these things in our discussion. But there are some techniques that can be used. Federated learning. What does that mean? Well, federated learning really is the allowing of the AI models to learn across several unidentified systems. So instead of the AI learning from one device, it's learning across several. That's one thing that can be used. Differential privacy, where mathematical noise is added to data sets, which protects the individual. And there are some others, and I won't get into all of them, but this is where data protection comes in. If we are not diligent in applying the techniques, then the governments will step in, and they have done so already. Several laws, we've heard about the GDPR, we've heard about the CCP out of California, we've heard about one coming out of Brazil, one coming out of China. Well, in the Caribbean, we also have our own sets of laws. And these laws are designed to protect the personal data of individuals. One which is coming, much like the GDPR did. This is going to catalyze the discussion surrounding AI. It's coming out of Europe. It should come this year. It's going to be extraterritorial, meaning that it's going to affect us in the Caribbean, even though it is passed in Europe. Take a look at what is happening in these other jurisdictions because they are setting the precedent for us. We have to be very careful that we are not reactive to what is taking place, but we are proactive. So to end, I want to recognize that AI has rapidly changed how we are doing business now. There are some positives, but there are some tremendous negatives. And as AI systems become increasingly integrated into our daily activities, we have to start focusing on privacy. And without our focus on privacy, then the governments will step in, as they already have done, and impose on us some strictures. We as an institution, the university, we as Caribbean individuals, academics have to start focusing on the techniques which are used to ensure that we can protect the privacy of individuals, even though we're using the tremendous benefits of artificial intelligence.
Thank you, Dr. Anglin. You stuck to your time and you did well, I think. Our next presenter is Dr. Venkatraman Balaji, who is Vice President of COL. And we are very happy to have you, Dr. Balaji, to give us a voice from outside of the region. So please make your presentation, Dr. Balaji.
Thank you. Good morning to everyone. I hope you can see my screen now. I want to thank...
Yes, we're seeing it.
I want to thank all of you and for the opportunity, and especially for bearing with me my name, which is actually a combination of my father's name and my name, but written in the wrong way when it comes to Anglo-Saxon tradition. My name is Balaji, my father's name is Venkatraman. But, you know, they mix it and present it in various ways in various countries. So my name is Balaji. So thank you once again for the opportunity. It's very good to come after two very eminent speakers. because they have set the stage very nicely. And they've also already clarified that in addition to a number of very good things that the new developments can bring about, they've also added some very viable, important cautions. One is about the privacy matter and about the possibility that politicians are stepping in to regulate, because they're really worried about it. And we will see what in this context we can do. In fact, what I want to say is we can do actually a lot. The open source community in AI is very active. Let's remember that most AI developments still take place in academic institutions. It's just that the delivery is done by people with tremendous commercial power. So a lot of open source work that takes place in universities, that culture has been carried into AI development as well. We'll see this in a few minutes from now. And I would be grateful if someone alerts me when I have 5 minutes to finish. Thank you. So now we have been talking of.
Will.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Dr. McKenzie. We are talking about ChatGPT, which has come to occupy a lot of attention in the public media and in the public mind space. However, let's remember also that it's actually a subset of generative AI, which spans a wide range of applications. As you can see in this diagram, to the extent to which you can see, you'll find that if you want to locate where ChatGPT is, it is somewhere in research, it's somewhere in OpenAI. Just one player. And look at the number of other players and the number of services. They're all big. They're really big. Even within research, you find that Stability.ai is a company, which is a small company, but with very big products, right? And you can find a number of others, working on image manipulation, speech generation, 3D model creation, etc. So this is really a very wide span that we are looking at, although it's easier to focus on ChatGPT to make a particular point. One of the biggest concerns that has emerged in recent times is applications like ChatGPT, which is a good name to refer to many things. These are actually based on large language models. One of the important trends that has emerged is that these are fluent, but not necessarily factual. In other words, because it has the gift of good speech and what we call fluency, it can also make statements that are totally unfounded, that are not factually well-founded, and it can make it look like very factual because it sounds so confident, like a very good salesperson. It can sound very, very confident while stating an incorrect matter. And this is now becoming a more serious issue. There are various people who have evaluated it to varying degrees. And one view from University College London is that only about 70% of its statements can be considered accurate. Now, how far can you use a teaching support system that's only 70% accurate in a university? So students need to be taught to become, it's not only teachers who should be critically evaluating outputs. Students should also be taught to become critical and evaluating its outputs. But a bigger concern is one related to bias. As a machine learning model, ChatGPT is trained on data that may contain biases. One estimate is that about 45% of the data that a typical large language model uses comes from Wikipedia. Another 45% comes from what is called Common Crawl, a kind of a software that crawls every website available anywhere in the world. And a lot of websites contain incorrect information, biased information, all that goes into the learning process. So 90% of what goes into training a model comes from sources that are unchecked. Who checked over the veracity of Wikipedia's information? Who has measured the biases? None. So all that has gone into this. So you can see this in a link that I have cited, which shows that there are lots of concerns there. The next one, I come from a developing country, that's India, and many of us are very sensitive to challenges of ethnic bias. We live in different situations we are often conscious of, and we are sensitive to the potential existence of ethnic biases. However, much deeper one is the gender bias. In fact, Professor Arvind Narayan from Princeton University, he's a very eminent worker and leading expert in the area of AI. He has pointed out that big models. ChatGPT, the popular version is based on what's called GPT 3.5. And the paid version offers both GPT 3.5 as well as GPT 4, which is a very advanced model. It's supposed to use 1.6 trillion parameters, whereas ChatGPT 3.5 uses 175 billion, almost 10 times more in terms of the data that it has used. But what Professor Narayan says is that both of them are strongly biased on a benchmark. A benchmark meaning, computer scientists have evolved a very strong benchmark on how to avoid gender biases. And apparently that has been used in training ChatGPT. In spite of that, it comes out with major statements and propositions that show gender bias. For example, in a conversation, ChatGPT reported that an attorney cannot be pregnant because it assumes that an attorney by definition would be a man, right? And so these are kind of biases that many of these scientists are measured and have expressed concerns about. They also talk about implicit bias, which is very difficult to even understand, leave alone remove. They know that explicit bias to some extent can be addressed, but not implicit bias. People still don't know where it comes from and how it can be addressed. Now, there are also bigger concerns. I'm citing the US Federal Trade Commission, which published this document earlier this month. What are they saying? That like in Google earlier days presented only search results. Then eventually it started to mix advertisement results. Now you find that if you look at the top page, the first three are about 30% of the entries are only advertisements. They are classified as advertisements, but you can also manipulate ChatGPT and language models to project advertisements. And it might not distinguish between what is organically created inside the language learning model and what is created through payment. And this has become already a bigger concern. I mean, this is already becoming a bigger concern. And that's why US Federal Trade Commission is kind of cautioning people about that, although they are not able to do anything at this point in time. That's called the Turing test. And my previous speaker, Dr. Anglin, referred to the Artificial Intelligence Act of European Union because European political leaders have already sensed that this has a tremendous media technology potential. And therefore, like media technology, it can be used to manipulate individual opinions, not collective opinions, individual opinions. And therefore, they're already keen on regulating it. This means that European Union could become a system in itself, like China is already a system in itself. So rest of the world led by United States could be another system, or we don't know yet. But what it proposes is that it's essentially focusing on minimizing risks. I mean, that's something that my previous speaker alluded to. And then there is a cost factor. Generative AI services are free, but when you receive a free service, it also comes with unavailability, and there are data processing, like privacy was referred. It can take a lot of your personal information and photos, and God knows what it does with it. It's never going to be made very clear. And if you want reliable and consistent access, there is a need to pay. But even after payment, there is no clarity on whether you can get your data back or your big data becomes part of somebody else's package. We don't know. So there is a cost factor, there's a privacy factor. I'm only focusing on cost. The cost can become very large when you open these services, buy commercial services and open them to faculty as well as teachers, right? And how do we make use of LLMs in education? That's the question I'm asking. First, we need to address the bias because the quality of data used to train the model is very, very deep. As I said, explicit biases can be addressed in principle. What we need to do is, every model needs to be trained. We can apply training techniques in such a way that you can overcome biases. I'll give you examples of that. You can install the. In fact, companies are trying to make an effort to tell you that it cannot be done, because it's like saying that a big Hollywood producer will tell you that, oh, no, your country can't produce my movie. It's way too sophisticated for your country. That's a standard marketing technique for many years, and AI companies still do that. However, you can create local installation. That's where the open source community comes. The open source language learning model is already a significant movement. As I said, the source of most AI ideas is in the academia. And academia is committed to open source. And therefore, a lot of effort is going on, and it's boosted of all things by Facebook. Facebook published as open source their own language model called Llama. And it contains 175 billion parameters, nearly as big as ChatGPT's base. But they published it as an open source with the condition that no commercial product should be built. It should be used only for academic purposes. And if you are in the life science, the scientific sector, there is something called Bloom language model, which is also fully open source, which is about as big. So between the two, what I'm looking at is universities like UWI have a great opportunity. You know, based on Llama, you can already see, I've set up, if you can see, Llama, Alpaca, GPT for all, Vicuna, Koala, OpenBuddy, these have already emerged as major applications. Some of them are even available to the public. For example, OpenBuddy is a multilingual chatbot. It can work with, they say, 1,100 languages. 1,100. I've tested, partly. It's available in many languages. Wherever there's a text.
5 minutes, Balaji.
Thank you. OpenBuddy is available, and it can offer, it's a robust model capable of answering questions and can perform translations. And the beauty is that you can, in theory, run it out of your own computer network in your own university. And now Stability, which is a very powerful company, believe me, they're as big as ChatGPT, but in the area of images. They run something called Stable Diffusion, which is one of the biggest sources of image creation application. And they've recently issued a chatbot into open source. You can see a screenshot of it. It's very rapidly coming into public, and in theory, you can download this software and recreate it in your own system. Now, what does it take to train a system? Let's ask this question. Today, a lot of new results are available. It shows that you can apply some raw data. You don't have to take the Wikipedia, but you can get some other raw data. Say, select all the published papers of your university and train. That's item one. Item two is quality check data. Like when you feed images, etc., you avoid feeding images of horrendous situations, etc., etc. You avoid things that are culturally insensitive. These are called quality checked or labeled data that you train. And once you do that with something like 1,500 to 15,000 data points, you find that you can get a really superior experience for your user. And what can UWI do? If this is, of course, a wild thought. You can identify an open source LLM. You can create a local installation in just one campus, say Monarch campus, but make it available from that campus to the entire university. You can fine tune it. This is where students can be given projects. Faculty can work with them to do training of this language model by applying what is called clean data. So the model picks up good behavior from you ethically and add human feedback. Students and faculty can continually give feedback. This can significantly reduce explicit biases. It can also be made far more suitable to the context of the Caribbean, about which our first speaker spoke to a considerable extent. And as you can see here in my screen, the United Arab Emirates has already made it a national project. They've created something called Falcon, which is a 40 billion parameter AI frame to reflect the values of UAE, which is itself like the Caribbean region. It's a combination of many national governments, a federation. And they're also making it available to other countries, which means that the values of that region, the Islamic values, the civilizational values of that region, can now become available to people who want to emulate that. So we see it's already become a national project, and why can't we have a regional project like what UWI can do? So while concluding, I want to point out that the issues are becoming bigger. Now, last week, you may have seen this, that US Surgeon General has issued a new social warning on social media on youth and youth mental health. Believe me, time is not far when such a warning will appear for AI and youth mental health as well. We can control all that as a responsible university by going in the direction of open sourcing and boldly attempting a trial and experiment. And, we have the program called Virtual University for Small States of the Commonwealth, which works with your university. we could probably have a discussion meeting, a brainstorming workshop on it. So I want to thank you all for the opportunity, and I want to stop here. And I may have to leave at about 10 o'clock because of my other commitments. So I'm grateful once again for the opportunity.
Thank you so much. I will continue to say, Dr. Balaji. Thank you so much. And I know that our attendees can see how these three presentations really work well together to give us a kind of lens through which to see AI and generate AI generative systems. Please remember, participants, to drop your comments in the chat, and we had also put the program in the chat. We will move on to the next section where we look more closely at teaching and learning experiences. And Mrs. Stewart McCoy will lead us through that segment. Remember your times, colleagues and participants.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mackenzie. I don't know about you, colleagues, but I feel like a child who has been let free in a candy store. So far we have been learning and being reminded of the whole ethical concerns, data privacy, bias. I never really thought about the gender bias aspect until we tested something yesterday, and the name of one of the characters that we put in was Kenya. And so ChatGPT automatically figured that Kenya was a male. So it is interesting that we also need to bear these things into mind. We have to consider the use of students' data, where the information that we put into these systems, where do they go and how are they used? I love Dr. Balaji, I will not attempt to call the surname, open source solution. Of course, we have to think about where exactly does the UE stand in all of this. The UE as a regional giant. So we have to consider our role in leading policy, training, curriculum creation, ensuring the quality is met, that we address the data privacy aspects and so forth. Now we're going to move into what exactly has been happening in the classroom. What are the perspectives of those who are engaging with this particular disruption? And so we begin by listening to, who is our first person? We're going to be listening to Dr. Chantal Moore, who is from the Faculty of Humanities and Education. So Dr. Moore.
Okay, thank you very much, Michelle. Chantal is good. All right, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so very much for the opportunity to share my research on students writing using AI, specifically ChatGPT, looking at the implications for teaching and leadership. So I want to begin with these research questions. This is an ongoing research. I might not be able to share everything here today in the interest of time, but I will try my best to cover as much as possible. I want to look at the experiences and perspectives of one student user, and also 2 Caribbean lecturers and 33 Jamaican school leaders towards using AI in academic writing. My second question I'm exploring is, how can we address the concerns and harness the benefits of AI's use in academic writing and teaching/education? And finally, what are the implications for leadership, given the potential or the use of AI in academic writing and teaching or education? So what really is the crux of the matter? Why this furore, uproar around ChatGPT and AI in education? It's really that writing is the bedrock of academia when you think about it. And if that's what academics use to distinguish students' content knowledge of an area, academics use it to know if students actually understand certain processes and application of knowledge to varied contexts. And we're also using it to get a sense of how students can demonstrate their ability to communicate this information to an audience, which will evaluate and assess what the student knows in the content area. So if it is that this is what we're expecting from students, the scare and the fear comes with ChatGPT having the ability to mirror many of these realities. So then, if ChatGPT can do those things, what is left for educators and academics to truly assess in their students' writing and their content acquisition and the demonstration that they know and they can share and they can communicate this very well. So I think that is where the uproar really is with regard to academic writing and from the academic discourse community in terms of whether or not ChatGPT is allowed access into the academy or not. So then, when you think about the potential that ChatGPT has for these writing matters, ChatGPT, when a student puts work or requests information from ChatGPT, it produces work that, or it produces content that conforms to the conventions of grammar and mechanics. The information coming out of ChatGPT is coherent, it's organized. There's clarity around the expression. You get a sense of a writer's voice emanating from the piece. There's also that demonstration of original thinking because ChatGPT, does that kind of scouring of the information out there in the e-space, the virtual space, and brings that back. So there's that sense that it elaborates on information, it substantiates claims, and there is that demonstration of extensive and wide content. And if you ask it, it can produce documentation, valid sources, in-text citation. There is conversation around how valid some of the sources really are, because persons have seen where ChatGPT has actually brought back sources which are not traceable. They cannot locate them, on the internet or, in the sources that they seek to explore. And then also with ChatGPT, you're able to produce plagiarism-free writing, again, if you instruct the software or the AI to provide sources to back up what it is, claiming. So these are the potentials of ChatGPT. This is what it's doing. So then what is left to be penalized in students' writing? Because when you think about the academic discourse community, they tend to be punitive in terms of how they read students' work, how they assess. They're always looking to see what else didn't the student do well enough so that I could mark it down. Rarely do you find many academics marking from the perspective of the student has achieved these, they have met these objectives and criteria well, and start from that position of rewarding. It's usually more the flip side where you move from the space of punitive. And so because of that orientation, then the question is, what else is there for us to do if ChatGPT is already addressing these 9 areas of competence that we're looking for? How can educators then separate the proverbial sheep from the goats? That is the question. So look at what software in terms of AI software that are available for students to use to help them with their academic writing. And these are just 10 of the top ones. There are others which are available, but students basically can turn to AI to get help, to get information on just about all areas of academic writing, to get some assistance there. And when you ask ChatGPT itself to define what it is, what does it offer to students, this is what comes up when you ask it, what is ChatGPT? I move to the 3rd paragraph, which says, one of the unique features of ChatGPT is its ability to generate text that is similar in style and tone to human writing. And this has made it a popular tool for various applications. Overall, ChatGPT represents a significant advancement in the field of natural language processing and has the potential to revolutionize the way we react and interact with language and text. And again, those are some of the problem areas that academics are wrestling with, what they're contesting in the field of academia in terms of whether students should use it or not, because it's very difficult for them to always distinguish whether it is the student's work or whether it's work coming from artificial intelligence. And how can we reward work from artificial intelligence when in fact we're supposed to be rewarding the student? So here you have ChatGPT. The interface looks like this. You put information in there and you're asking it, so what is academic writing? We're looking at how it works and the speed with which it responds. So here's
5 minutes,
ChatGPT
Chantal.
doing its thing. Okay. All right, so already we're seeing the speed, we're seeing the content, we're seeing the organization, and there's more there, but I am going to just quickly move ahead so that, I try to cover as much as possible. So what happened there is that ChatGPT provides writing assistance. It analyzes a wide array of information, provides adequate summaries. It does foreign language translations. It does creative writing, critical analyses. It creates original work. It has the ability to produce something new from something old. I tested it coming out of a previous presentation where one of the attendees mentioned that he had put the request in for it to write a poem in Patois. After the presentation, I went and I tried that. It created a wonderful poem in Patois about mangoes. I asked it to compare that original piece to a poem that is already written about mangoes. And it was able to bring that up and do that kind of comparison. And it was really instructive and insightful, the potential and range of ChatGPT. So some of the cons include compromising writing integrity. If ChatGPT can do that, these are usually the tasks that you would ask students to do. So when students put or transfer that responsibility or request to ChatGPT, it questions integrity now. The lecturer or academic is not really sure anymore whose work is it. Encourages plagiarism. It stifles students' creativity and originality, because if a student is going to turn to ChatGPT every time to create, then the student is not going to develop his or her creative capacity. It limits critical thinking to some extent. Again, some of the information is unreliable, needs to be checked, and the biases inherent in cultural and other kinds of contexts coming out. So based on all of that, I'm really interested in how is it as educators we're going to forge ahead? How are we going to wrestle with ChatGPT and find a balance or a middle ground for us to accommodate it and use it for students' advancement? And so it's this research now that I'm doing with one graduate student. I've done the interviews already with the 2 lecturers from St. Vincent and the Grenadines to get a wider perspective outside of Jamaica. And I've also interviewed 32 school leaders from Jamaica. The questions I wanted to find out from them, what are their perspectives? How do you see it in terms of students using it to help with writing? What are the concerns? How can we address them and harness the benefits of ChatGPT? And then what are the potentials in education and writing when it comes to implications for teaching and leadership? So some of the responses. The one student who is a mature graduate student who came to his graduate program not being very proficient in academic writing and struggled with writing for a long time, sought out many avenues to help him, found an answer in ChatGPT to be able to overcome some of the writing challenges. The student said that I never thought that I could ever enjoy writing. I struggled with writing, you have something in your mind, but you don't know how to write it or how to start. What the AI does is to jumpstart that process for you to build on. And I down below, it said the beauty about AI technology is that even though it is advanced, it can scale down its features just for you. It makes learning practical. It personalizes the learning experiences. Those are the verbatim accounts from the student. So the student had writing challenges, and but from their AI or ChatGPT has been able to help that student to personalize the learning, made it very practical, and the student has been able to scale and adapt writing to conform to the conventions of the academic discourse community. In terms of the two teachers from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the conversation that's been going on that they shared about the role and space of ChatGPT in education, they said that we'd be fools not to keep up with the technology and use it to our advantage. And then just one more moment, Charmaine, please. And on the other side, it says that it can be scary, but the younger folks are there already, and we have to catch up or be left clueless about writing or be left behind. The school leaders also talked about how they have to reevaluate their roles as teachers. Some were hearing about ChatGPT for the first time, and they realized that they have to get with it, but also they saw spaces within which they can use it in their classrooms. And overall, they see it as a double-edged sword, which although it detracts, it has the potential to be advantageous, right? So in terms of harnessing, I think this is where I'd want to get at. As educators, we really need to rethink how we are now going to be using ChatGPT, because it is here to stay and it's not going anywhere. So we have to think about best practices and ideas for integrating it into our pedagogy, our assessment, and our teaching. Definitely some of the educators have used it as a part to support essay writing process, to help students to appreciate the structure of essay writing, how to generate models of, say, letters, bios, speeches, summaries, whatever it is. Also about information literacy and AI literacy, to triangulate information, to cultivate critical thinking, various assessment methods, and even to come up with a variety of in-class activities. So in terms of implications for leadership, school leaders have to start thinking about the strengths as well as the limitations and so on. Thank you so very much, Charmaine. I stop here. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. This is certainly a lot of food for thought. I will have to see how we can find a way to share, what's coming out of this session today. We have to move on to our next presenter, Professor Daniel Kaur from the Department of Computing in the Faculty of Science and Technology. So without further ado, Professor Kaur.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Yes, we're seeing your screen.
Are you still seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful.
Yes.
Okay, yes. So good afternoon. Actually, I am very pleased to see the preceding presentations because they fit quite nicely with what I wanted to discuss today. I wanted to share a little bit of a historical perspective on the technology. Yes, I will still focus on education, but one of the things that I think is sort of primary as a major concern is, will these tools replace us? Are we threatened by them? To what extent ought we be concerned? And it's not a negligible threat, but I hope to leave a positive message that we can do something about what's in front of us. So the nature of the disruption is clear. I won't spend too much time on this. We've seen large language models since OpenAI unleashed onto the world November 30, 2022, ChatGPT. That just made the mainstream aware of large language models. You'll see in a while they've been around for a little bit. But what we see and what sort of has taken us by storm is that it's capable of creative textual expression, can produce art, visual as well as music. It's a completely natural language interaction. It has apparently knowledge of all kinds of areas. It just seems to know about everything and anything. And it can answer ordinary questions that we might pose on exams. I put this one here because of the education concern, and I will get to that one later. So that's what has hit the world. And the rapidity with which ChatGPT was adopted is just a sort of clear indicator of how much impact it has, and I guess why we're talking about it today. Now, as a backdrop to that, I just want to cover a few things that are happening that are part of the problem. Let's call it opportunity as well as a threat. So let me not say problem, because it is the reality, really. So Microsoft decided to incorporate this into Bing, and that made the public via other tools have access to GPT. Bear in mind, Google had this technology for about 4 years, and they were very cautious. They were very concerned about what this could do in the wrong hands. So they were very, they were using it, but only internally. They never had a public facing exposure. But now all, bars are off because of this race. And they're not only two horses in that race. Worse, OpenAI has closed the source. So that now means that we don't know exactly how those models are developing. We've seen an exponential explosion in the sizes of the various GPTs, although they do say GPT-5 is unlikely to grow at the same rate because they're going to make the changes in different directions. Secondarily, you have Llama, which is Meta's large language model. Dr. Balaji mentioned it actually. That got leaked to the open source community, and they've continued to develop on it. And now, in fact, they've actually, in some respects, provided or produced advances that even are not available at Google or OpenAI or Microsoft. And that is to basically reduce the required hardware to run some of these large language models. And so effectively, what we're seeing is that large language models are here to stay. There's no banning this. There's no comfort in thinking, oh, only large companies or state actors have access to these things. We need to presume that in the near future, they will be as commonplace as the cell phones that we use today. So that is the nature of the disruption. I know what I would like to do. Of course, one of the major concerns when you look at what it can do, and you've seen some examples, is what does that mean for us? What does that mean for jobs? What does that mean, certainly in terms of education? What does that mean in terms of what we teach, how we teach, etc.? How do we assess our students? How do we make sure we transfer competences, which is mainly what the task or the point of education really is. So, I shouldn't say the point, one of the points. So this is the nature of the disruption. So what I wanted to do is kind of take a little step back, and I'm going to take a historical perspective on the technology just to kind of give us a sense of how this came about, how much of what you've heard some experts express concern at this race, and what could happen if it's not controlled. And I want to just kind of take a step back, look at what has happened, put it in context so that we can look forward with that framework of understanding how this technology has evolved. And that's kind of why I say I'm looking towards building a lens that we can use to assess what the impact is going to be. So the idea of building a machine that can think like a human is actually something that, in fact, I'm not even sure exactly when that was first contemplated, but around 1950, Alan Turing defined a test that, so this is one of the problems. Thinking like a human is actually in and of itself not so well defined. But he came up with this test that simply said, okay, if we can, here's a simple way to test if a machine is intelligent. If you could have a conversation with a person or the machine. So if a person, okay, thanks. If a person can have a conversation with two things they can't see, one is a machine, one is a person, could he tell the difference? If the machine could pass that test, then that's what we call the Turing test. So that was defined. The idea or area of AI itself was defined in 1956. The underlying technology that are underneath large language models were actually defined in the 60s. But then a very important paper in 69 kind of proved that they have limited capability. And so that kind of got abandoned. The consequence of that was that we had this area called symbolic representation develop, and that took over in the 90s. And I'll get to that shortly. But effectively, the large language models, the neural networks underlying them, kind of made a comeback in around 2011. And you can see those technologies, many of which you probably are familiar with already, and I'll just move on. So those two camps created different outcomes, and what we think of as AI, depending on how long you've been familiar with the discipline, will you'll recognize some of these things as consequences of this. So out of the symbolic representation, so the idea here is that in order to think like a human, to reason about things, we have to know what we're talking about and reason about it, and you apply logical thinking. So the consequence of that kind of thinking is that what we tried to do is build systems that had precise representations. That meant that we could describe what was going on. It had explicit reasoning mechanisms, but that also meant that if you needed to try and define it for a new system, you had to kind of start over, and they were quite rigid, so you couldn't deal with exceptions necessarily and so on. When you look at how the connectionist system works, we can't really see how it works because it's modeled like the human brain, but it learns by example. It's quite flexible. It can deal with new information, no problem. And now, coming full circle, because of what technology has given us access to in terms of the amount of data that it can offer, these large language, well, they now become large. And what we're seeing is that by becoming large, they actually have now become so capable that they're able to pass the Turing test. In fact, now passing the Turing test is viewed as a bad thing because now you have a machine that could fake being a human, and that raises ethical issues. So what is the pass mark for being intelligent has now shifted again. But let's just kind of keep our minds on what we have in front of us. These LLMs appear very knowledgeable, but they still have limited reasoning abilities. GPT-4 is getting better, and perhaps in future they'll get even better. For now, right? They have limited access to real-time data that should have been for now because they're not connected. And they have limited access to manipulate the real world because we haven't connected them for now. And the important thing is the for nows. So when you look at what is happening to education, right now, GPT-4 can pass the bar, can pass USMLE exams. Those are the professional exams for lawyers and doctors in the US. So of course, that kind of changes what you do in the classroom and how you're going to assess whether your students have actually acquired the competencies that you hope that they do when you design your curriculum. That's going to require us to rethink assessment. And importantly, really critical is how do we ensure that students can acquire those levels of Bloom's taxonomy learning outcomes especially when they're needed for the higher levels. So they're building blocks, because we've seen that even the current GPT can easily pass those kinds of assessments. So we're challenged to deal with that. Our curriculum will naturally have to evolve. Teaching methodology is going to have to evolve because our learners are going to come expecting and already immersed in LLM enabled tools all around them. And so they'll expect to be able to use them in their learning. That perhaps will lead to things like personalized teaching. You can sort of get a lesson plan that sort of gets, maybe the teacher chooses what you're going to learn because of the curriculum, but how it gets dispensed to the learner and how the learner interacts may very well become personalized because the AI can step in. So what the role of the teacher is going to be, that has to change. That's going to change whether we like it or not. Finally, I just want to leave a concern, and with a positive note though. So I think what we have to do is make sure we keep our eyes open. How do we as humans make sure we don't lose important primary competencies? So how do we make sure we don't relinquish to these AI tools the things the tasks that they do for us so conveniently? How do we make sure that we don't actually lose the ability to do that? And I think if we can do that, then we can make sure that we remain relevant, because right now and in the future, our role and our involvement and our interaction with them will always have that human component, as long as they're not connected to the real world, as long as they can't manipulate it, and as long as they don't have any particular directive as to what they should study next, we still have a role. And so we must make sure that never goes to zero. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Kaur, and thank you very much for sticking to your time. This has also been a really very important presentation. I would say, especially this last slide, the impact on education. And I hope we can have a little discussion at the end of the presentations. Next, we have Dr. Nadine Maitland from the University of Technology. Dr. Maitland, please take it away. Yes, we're seeing your slides. Perhaps you want to put it on the
Good
presentation
afternoon.
view. Good afternoon. We're seeing your presentation. Perhaps you could put it on the presentation view.
Yes. Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me. So the discussion today is a very enlightening one. And I must confess that I am UTech UWI. Professor Kaur knows me very well. And here now we're going to talk about AI, and I must put a disclaimer out there. I'm a teacher. I teach artificial intelligence. That is one of the core subjects that I teach. But today we are seeing where large language models, they have evolved. Now, I think AI is a game changer. That is my perspective, because when we look at how things have changed and how we will need to apply ourselves in the space, then we see that there's no way of getting around the use of these models. Now, we have several models, many of them have been mentioned before, so I won't go back through them. So we have models that can be used even in the creative space. They are used to generate, so they use ChatGPT to generate some content around a particular idea. Then it is placed in a particular form, and you can select pictures and so on, and it can reduce the time to write scripts and things like that significantly. Now we have other AI tools that can be used to enhance the ability to create blogs, social media updates. There's such a wide range of things that an AI model can do. And we have spoken so extensively about the being AI and so on. I would just want for us to look at how practical it would be for us to use it in the teaching and learning environment. So in my mind, we must have a hybrid approach. Hybrid approach meaning that, like Professor Kaur just said, how do we apply it? So I believe, and we have seen it out there, and many persons have said it, we can use it to generate ideas. So Professor Kaur dealt with a part of my presentation, generate ideas. Then we can have brainstorming sessions that we allow our students, we may need to put them in groups, personalize the delivery. Now, what we are seeing is that 99.9%, as a matter of fact, all the speakers this morning alluded to the ability of ChatGPT to generate errors. And that's a very big concern. So all the models that we look at, all the models will say to you, ensure that whatever is generated, it is accurate. So we could ask students to critique, this information is generated from ChatGPT. What do you think about this? Critique this, summarize it, critically review this that have been generated, because many times we will find that there are errors in what is generated, because these, so it can also spark debates. So you may have persons who we can also develop debates. Students need to defend this one to say why they think it's true, and the next person may want to go against it. So we need to develop different learning techniques that could be applied within the space to assist the students to think critically. Because one of the things that I know, some of the positives is that it will reduce search time. So one speaker earlier put a question to ChatGPT and it responded in seconds. So no longer are we dependent on taking a long time to go and search this and search that, but how accurate it is. It also provides a lot of alternatives in a short space of time, new perspectives. It reduces time taken also to develop ideas. The speaker that spoke earlier about writing. When I went to university, when we did academic writing, we had to write that thing about 5, 6, 7 times, and the tutor would correct it and tell you what you need to do and so on. No longer we need to do that. So it will reduce the time it takes to develop ideas, products, etc. Facilitators and learners can also use this medium to expand their knowledge base. So both lecturers and students can use this space, but we have to use it responsibly. We can improve critical thinking and problem solving, but I will join now some of the drawbacks, and that's the last point Professor Kaur spoke about in his presentation. Our over-dependence on these models can cause us to be reluctant to think on our own. The Neo-Luddites team, the group that speaks about computing and technology, I will not take the extremist position that they take because I'm a computer scientist. But one of the things that they point out is that many times, because of these models, we no longer take responsibility for what we are supposed to do. So we give over all our responsibility to these models. I can use a very good example. I'm sure many of us would have experienced that. Today, very few people try to add numbers. So if you have a 1.3 and a 2.45, many persons you draw for your smartphone if you don't have a calculator. These are some simple things that we can look at to say, okay, if we continue on this path, so everything that we need, we go to ChatGPT or we go to one of the other models and so on, when do we really reflect and use our brain in order to carry out some of these tasks? After a while, we won't be able to do it. One of the things is the biases. Another speaker, alluded to this, because of the nature of how these models gather the data. All the biases come to us. So we have to be very careful about that. And there are models that contain the current inconsistencies. We need to check back the data before we use it. Now, on May 27th, somebody sent an article to me that was written out of the US, where some lawyers are suing a Colombian airline because some cases that were generated were not true, and it was generated from ChatGPT. And the judge was very, incensed to say that these cases came with decisions and quotes and also internal citations that were not correct. So these are some things that we must pay attention to, right? And when the lawyer was asked, he admitted that he used the OpenAI model to generate, and not only to generate some of these things, but in his research. So it has a lot of implication also for research and academia. So we have to ensure that our students are aware of this and ensure that they do the research as it relates to this, so they don't just go and take something from the ChatGPT. I have a perfect example. I gave a question to a exam question, and the student went on to ChatGPT, but by the time I saw the result, I said, this came straight because just the writing style told me that this is generated. And when I went and I put the question in ChatGPT, I got the exact answer. Now, how do we handle this? So from an academic perspective, we know that, it is here to stay. However, how are we going to incorporate this in our teaching and learning, and also manage how it is used in the space? And I think that is my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nadine. Dr. Maitland, I just wanted to say something. The last 3 presentations really have us engaging our faculties about exactly, the depth and the extent of these generative AI tools, not just ChatGPT, but whether it is text or image or other forms, we really need to consider the question that Professor Poor asked, the matter of loss of our primary competencies. We really need to look at that. I am encouraged by the empirical data that's coming out of Chantal's research. And one of the things that I'm reminded as I'm listening to these presentations is that we need to handle these generative tools as a tool. It is something that we have to learn more about, that we have to be judicious in our use. We have to be strategic in what we do. And so thank you very much, Prof. Kaur, and thank you so much, Dr. Maitland. We're going to move on to Mrs. Shellon, and she's Shellon Samuel's wife. So we're going to move on to Shellon, and Sharon is going to take it to us from the Michael University, and we're going to be looking more at assessment and how that plays as an ally when looking at these artificial intelligence tools and platforms. Shellon?
Good morning, colleagues. Are you hearing me clearly? Are you seeing my screen?
Hearing and
Yes.
seeing.
Great. All right, so greetings, audience and fellow panelists. Thank you, Planning Committee, for the invitation to share briefly on how I have been using ChatGPT as an assessment ally as a teacher educator. So, considering that my time is short, I'll get straight into sharing 3 ways in which ChatGPT has supported and enhanced the learning experiences of my students and myself. So the first strategy is using ChatGPT as a tool for assessment as learning. Now, students' ability to assess their own learning and monitor their progress to inform future learning has been a 21st century learner imperative. And the previous presenters have really spoken at length about the need for us to preserve our primary competencies. And so I personally emphasize learner agency in my courses. And I have found that there is a deficiency in this area, and student teachers are sometimes of the view that I mark very hard, especially when they do not get a perfect score on a particular piece of assignment. So I use ChatGPT as an assessment as learning tool where I aim to have them gain insights into their own learning processes and develop their metacognitive skills and self-regulatory skills. So this is with the hope that they would eventually lead or develop deeper understanding of the concepts that I'm teaching and improve their learning outcomes. So for example, I would demonstrate to my students as a whole class how to use ChatGPT to help them evaluate their own learning before submitting an assignment to me. I would demonstrate on how to teach ChatGPT success criteria. So as you can see on screen, I would say, ChatGPT, learn the following criteria for writing a rationale for choice of alternative tasks. And that's part of an assignment that they have to do in the course classroom assessment. So I would input the criteria, ask ChatGPT to learn it, and then ChatGPT would reiterate the prompts or the criteria that I have given to it. And then I would ask my class, as a whole class, we would review what ChatGPT has given to us and then evaluate to make sure that it is learning what we want to learn. So of course, you can ask ChatGPT to remove something or to add something to what it just presented. So in this case, I asked ChatGPT, or I would ask ChatGPT to remove a part of the criteria that they have produced. and then regenerate the success criteria. When we are sure as a group that the ChatGPT has learned what we want it to learn, then we move on to prompting ChatGPT to evaluate a piece of work, student work. So I would ask ChatGPT to now evaluate this piece of writing or the rationale that the student has produced using the success criteria that it learned. And the ChatGPT would do that in seconds. Now, this exercise does not end there. The icing on the cake now is where I ask students to now analyze ChatGPT's response, the scores that ChatGPT has provided, and I would ask them to go back to the scoring rubric that I have given to them and compare the scores, compare the feedback as well. And they would now reflect on the exercise. So in this case, or in one case, ChatGPT gave a 7 out of 8 for the rationale, whereas I gave a 4 out of 8. I would, of course, provide some reflection prompts to help them focus their reflection. John Dewey said that it is not from our experiences that we learn, but it is from reflecting on our experiences. And that is why I believe that reflection in this era of ChatGPT is going to be very paramount. We have to now think about how is it that we are going to help our students to evaluate their own learning using this tool. And of course, other reflection prompts can be used. I like to change it up. Sometimes I give them some very specific questions. For example, what I have here, what insights did you gain from the exercise? Did it challenge your initial perceptions of the rubric or the criteria? And with this newfound knowledge, how would you apply this to future assessments or assignments? My second strategy is I use ChatGPT as a tool for creating model exemplars or as a resource creator. I am a firm believer of providing students with model exemplars, especially since we want to promote learner agency. We do not have enough time in the semester for trial and error, extensive trial and error. And so I believe having exemplars would allow students to be able to visualize what a good
3 minutes, Shalon.
Yes, what a good assessment looks like, help them to clarify expectations. So I have used ChatGPT to create almost everything in terms of resources. For example, in one of my methodology classes where students are to learn how to write lesson plans using specific teaching models, I would ask ChatGPT to generate lesson plans, model lesson plans. We would critique, look at how it matches up to what we are learning, and also have some examples that are non-examples, some with errors, so that we can critique in our sessions, and they would demonstrate their ability to analyze and apply best practices. And finally, I use ChatGPT as a tool for adaptive or personalized instruction. ChatGPT has the capability of adapting or tailoring questions and examples for students based on their input. So it can adapt follow-up questions or provide additional explanations and resources to support learning and address any misconception. So I would give students starter prompts in my sessions and ask them to continue the conversation with ChatGPT. Now, sometimes because I teach methodology, I have groups of students who are from different faculties. I would put them in groups, for example, math together, science teachers together, and I would say to them, use ChatGPT to learn this concept as it relates to your discipline. And this would allow them to get a more personalized idea of the lesson topic. And of course, students would need to submit screenshots to me of their conversations with ChatGPT, the sentence prompts that they have provided or asked ChatGPT, as well as what ChatGPT gives to them. And perhaps in future, they would do some live presentations just to make sure that they are indeed learning what they are to learn and share with their peers and not hiding behind a screen, as sometimes that is very often. I've also used ChatGPT in a different way. I've plugged in my class profile and I asked ChatGPT to suggest some ways I can differentiate for my students based on their abilities or interests and preferences. And it would help in that. Of course, sometimes it needs tweaking, and that is important. This is where our thinking would come in, where we would use ChatGPT to help extend our thinking and even be more creative in what we can come up with as human beings. And that is these are 3 ways in which I have been using ChatGPT and rethinking how we assess at the Michael University College. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. Marvelous. I love the fact that we are engaging in research, because it is one of the things that here on the campus, here within the UWiverse, we insist on research driving what we do. And so I am very pleased that we are engaging in research and that we can pull forward from a Caribbean perspective empirical data on what the tool means for us. I am reminded from Dr. Perkins' presentation. It wasn't brought forward in what we showed you, where she spoke about the UNESCO guide. And I don't know if you have accessed it, if you have gone through it. If you haven't, I'm encouraging us to do so. But there is a particular flow chart that I loved, because that also helps to shape our thinking when it comes on to using artificial intelligence and all these generative platforms and tools. So it starts as normal flow chart starts, and then it asks you a question, a very simple question. Does it matter to you? I'm looking at the flow chart. So if you see me turn away, I'm reading on a second screen. So it asks, does it matter to you if the output that is generated is true or not? If you say no, it doesn't matter, then you can always use it. If it does matter, the next question that is asked, do you have the expertise to verify that the output is correct? If your answer is no, then it is unsafe to use the tool, because it means that you would be presenting information that may not be accurate. If you have the expertise, whether you have textbooks or experts on hand, then it says, are you able and are you willing to take full responsibility, legal, moral, and otherwise, for any missed inaccuracies? And if you say yes, and then it says that it is possible for you to use the tool. If you say no, it says it is unsafe. So I do believe that this is a guide, a basic guide, the flow chart from the UNESCO guide, that we can take a look at and use it with our students as well as we continue to explore and delve further. Finally, we have as our last presenter, sweet Leighton Ellis comes to us from the Faculty of Engineering, and he too will be sharing with us his perspective, his experiences on artificial intelligence tools and platforms. Dr. Ellis?
Good afternoon now, everyone. It's the hardest time to present. I know I'm the one blocking you from lunch. So I'll go as quickly as I possibly can. And I'll start off with the whole idea of a story, how I've engaged with this with my students. My first encounter with AI in the classroom would have been an assignment that I had set for my students. Now, naturally, when you're in the classroom, you tend to have conversation as far as is possible. So you generally get to know how your students think, how they function, how they operate. So you know what level of writing you would expect. But then I get some spectacular writing from most of my students, and they're working in groups. So I decided, rather than even going to ChatGPT, I said, I'm sure they did not produce this content of work. So to test my theory, I said for those projects that were coming out, that you could obviously see that the writing style is not of their level. I said, all right, let me run a test. I'm going to give them 55% for this graded assignment. And those who come back and complain, then I'll give them the true reflective mark. Only to find out that nobody came back, nobody complained, everybody was quite contented with their grade, which was a clear indication to me something was wrong. And then, of course, sometime in the future, I started to talk to them about ChatGPT, and they admitted, sir, we tend to use it. And so that would have ensued a conversation. Now, I have no issue with it being used because it's here to stay. The question is, how do we go about using it? And what we've identified with a lot of our students, I've seen this with master students, with undergraduate students, even when it comes to research, they will tell you, sir, you know, we've been searching online and we can find nothing to aid us in our assignment. And I say, tell me what you've been typing. And then you realize that the words that they're using to prompt the search engine, be it Google or whatever it is way off target, or they just don't know how to search. And I would type in something very similar to what they have said, and they see hundreds of content and say, sir, clearly you did something magical that we couldn't do, hence the reason why you found this. And that's one of the things I realized, that in education, our responsibility is not just to be content providers per se, but to teach them how to learn. And I think that's the big gap. The information is out there. We can't stop it. It's all around. But how they're able to access that and how they're using that is our responsibility. And so that is the shift that I do in my classroom. Another encounter I had with a student who were working together on a journal article. And I would have already provided an outline, and I described to her how I want the paper to be laid out. But she seemed to have not been getting it. So I said, all right, maybe this is an opportunity to use ChatGPT once again. And so I punched into ChatGPT basically the caption of what we're trying to achieve of the paper. And it provided a very detailed outline, almost replica of what I just described to her at that point in time. So I know of its ability in order to replicate something very, very close to what the human mind is able to do. But as we know going forward, that there are some concepts or some challenges there. So this is described in engineering as AI-aided engineering education. We like the whole aided aspect in terms of AutoCAD and other aspects like that. And it refers to utilizing AI techniques and resources to improve teaching and learning processes in higher education, to connect it with that scientific technology in that sense. Now, some of the content we have here, as you could see, are repetitive because it's the same baseline that we're all using. So I won't spend too much time going in details on that. But moving on from there, we were reminded that the ChatGPT and other such likes are only as good as the training data and the algorithms that they're based on. And as was mentioned by our first presenter and others, it embeds in it some level of bias and even generates and spreads misinformation. And these are the key things that our students need to be aware of. And I think UNESCO, being aware of that, has put that table out, that flow chart, as was mentioned before, in place to guide the thinking process behind it. And I rightly do agree that that should be something that's shared across all our student body, so that everybody is aware that, yes, use the tool, but no, it's only a tool. It's not something to provide you with the holistic content in that sense. But there are benefits to both groups of people, both the learner and the teacher. Some of the benefits that we have seen in terms of the educator is in regards to preparing outlines, presentations, quizzes, and even in the grading. A friend of mine in the UK, he uses it a lot for assisting with his teaching of his master students in coming up with topics for them to do the assignment, and using it for the grading of that said assignment as well. Since it was the one that created the question based on how he designed it, it was also sufficient in grading it. And he checked it back with his own grading, and it was very, very much closely aligned in that sense. And so he continues to use the tool and continue to use it to enhance. His intent going forward is to use it more extensively, where they can now have the students engage with it more in the classroom as well. The students can use it to solve questions, or students have used it for mathematical questions. But again, in engineering, some questions are difficult, and rather than trying to understand the steps, they just copy, paste. And what we have found is that some of the formulas that they're using is not what's covered in the content. And so for them, that's again how you identify the errors in the whole thing. And it goes back to what UNESCO is saying. If you're the expert in the field, you will know when there's an error in it. students not able to do that. And so they get caught most of the times in that sense. But we also use it for one of the struggles we have experienced here at the university and many other universities in providing feedback to our students. So this can be an excellent tool for, they have done their assignment, as one presenter said before, and you say, rather than come to me first, run it through the ChatGPT, see the feedback that you're getting, make adjustments in accordance with that feedback, and then bring the work. Most times you find that being improved. I think another similar tool would have been some of those other ones that looks for plagiarism, checks in that sense. And this one does that too, and even more, and can assist them in that regard. Now, what this looks at as a continuum with what one researcher found in terms of our current situation and a roadmap going forward to the future. And what they're promoting is that right now, yes, it's using for, it could be personalized in terms of how we do it. It assists with student assessment, but going forward, it can get to that aided aspect where it's now being embedded. But some of the challenges were mentioned before, the ethical issues, the gender issues. We can now train educators, or it will require us to train our educators in order to use these tools and not assume that everyone, by virtue of having a PhD, automatically downloads this knowledge embedded in their system. So while it closes doors for some of the lower level types of work activities, it opens up so many other doors as possibilities in that sense as well. Some of the new skills that we have, this is a question posed to ChatGPT, and these were some of the responses it provided. What becomes important for teachers as they use tools such as ChatGPT to readily access the students? They ensure that students understand how to use these tools responsibly, which goes back to UNESCO's idea, encourages critical thinking, or we could encourage critical thinking and problem solving, as a previous presenter mentioned before, and we can challenge them in the classroom. We can now foster creativity and innovation in coming up with new ideas about merging ideas from different fields, because it pulls on so much data source, it can now bring novel perspectives to the forefront beyond even what we possess in our own brains at this one time as well. It can incorporate the tools into our lesson plans in using it and aiding as a tool, similar how you would say, go to the library. You could say, now using ChatGPT, find this, and then now go and evaluate and make some suggestions. Some of the other things as application for teachers, as we said, facilitating personalized and adaptive learning experiences, enhancing student engagement and retention. And for a lot of our students, now, all of us have been students in classroom. You've had both types of teachers. You have the good ones who can impart knowledge very effectively, but we have some that have some difficulty in that sense. And what we found is that using these technologies, if the student is not receiving, because you have all the different learning styles in the room at the same time, and the lecturer may be biased to one. So the students can use these tools in order to try and ask questions based on how they think and receive answers tailored to their own learning styles. And that allows them to now be able to understand and, of course, relate more effectively to that teacher. So it becomes a supportive learning tool outside of the traditional classroom as well, where they can expend more time. For students, enhancing, again, learning and retention, providing on-demand educational resource and support, and enhances communication with the teacher. I remember one of the classes I had in my undergrad where most of us as students had difficulty, not just from an accent standpoint, but in terms of as level 1 students, we were engaging with someone who was very proficient in the area, and there was clearly a disconnect. I think sometimes as teachers, we forget that what we're sharing is new content, but also a new language entirely. For example, in engineering, we use terms such as stress and strain. Normal setting, stress and strain means one thing, but in engineering, it means something very different. So without understanding the common terms in context, it becomes difficult to communicate effectively. And so using that idea where students don't understand and maybe the lecturer can't bring the content across clearly enough using everyday examples, this now becomes a tool to enhance in that area as well and advance the learning. Using ChatGPT, we were able to generate a table that looks like this, that gives ideas as to how this could be applied in the classroom for both engineering and computing students. And it gives you 5 different options that could be used. Interactive lesson planning, and you could see that the benefits to the students as well as to the teacher. Collaborative problem solving ideas, which you could use in that sense. Personalized feedback, virtual tutor and mentorship, and of course, adaptive learning and personalized content. And so the tool, if used correctly, like any other tool, can be used to enhance. But if used incorrectly, it could, of course, generate great evil as well with it. And that, I think, is where the scare factor is for many persons. How, if one has a corrupt mind, like we have with some of our students, and we've seen them, I sit on the disciplinary committee for the campus, so I know that some of them have that mindset. And this will only enhance that mindset. But for others, who could benefit from it, we want them to use it to enhance their mindset, to expand even more and add more value to society as well. Some of the skills, the specialist skills are desirable. So from a professional standpoint, what they have found, this last slide. From a specialist standpoint, we found that in 2022, most in-demand engineering skill was machine learning. So the world is shifting towards this AI aspect, which is the basis for the AI, and this advantage. So we find that there has to be this shift in our academia setting as well, so that they're prepared for the world of work that is ahead of them as well. So that would have ended my presentation. Thank you for listening as well.
Thank you so much, Leighton. Ladies and gentlemen, we know that 2 hours would never be enough for us to truly demystify this new disruption. But we have gotten an insight into not just the perspectives, the theoretical aspect, but also the empirical, the research that is being done. And we are beginning to, there is a saying that says we tend to fear the things that we don't understand. And so discussions such as these begin to help us to understand the good, the bad, and the downright ugly aspects of generative artificial intelligence. Now, we had said that we would have some time for question and answers, but one of the things that I recognize is that the questions that are being posed in the chat are actually being answered by the presenters as we go along. So let me just take a quick time to say thank you very much to all the presenters. They never met, we never had a pre-meeting, but the presentations have been quite cohesive and have segued very nicely from one point to the other. So I'm going to raise a few questions. I know that we're close to wrapping up, and I'm just going to raise 2 questions in particular. So one has to do with the perspective that artificial intelligence, including ChatGPT, negatively impacts students' ability to think critically. What are your views on this? Which one of our panelists want to take that one?
I can add my voice. There is potential to limit the thinking capabilities of students. But for me, I see it now as an opportunity to help students to learn to think. Thinking is a skill that has to be taught, whether explicitly or through experiences. And I've found that many times we don't really understand how to think critically or what it entails. And so using ChatGPT to help them activate the metacognitive processes, that is a good thing. Similar to what my first strategy that I've been using over time, they will see that I really don't need to depend on ChatGPT, but it can be used to kind of jumpstart my thinking processes. So it's how it is used, I believe.
Thank you. Thank you for that response. I see Nadine has her hand up. Nadine, are you contributing to a response? Thank you.
Yes, I am. Thank you. I think the over-dependence on it, I don't think it will really it can negatively impact students' thinking if we allow them to be over-dependent on it. So if we ask them to look at this, think about it, get the answer like the presenter from Michael said, and then you can see basically what you did, and then you compare both, and it allows them to know, even build up their confidence. It can build confidence in also how they think and react, because sometimes really they just doubt themselves, and then, just helping them to learn how to, think and so on. It can help, but like we say, we have to strike the balance.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I see Prof. Kaur's hand is up, but I'd like to just raise the question asked by Craig Peru. Should all UWI students be exposed to algorithmic literacy via a foundation course? I guess we could say, should tertiary students be exposed to it, taking it more outside of UWI only? So go ahead, Professor Kaur.
Thank you, Dr. McKenzie. Actually, I wanted to comment on the question about critical thinking. I will leave the opinion on whether everybody should learn algorithmic thinking for later. But the issue is really about how we assess. So right now, I think that the fact that ChatGPT can do so much is in fact a reflection of how much we've reduced our students to sort of what they can demonstrate they know. And what this is showing up is that that's not the best way to educate people. So if yes, you want critical thinking, then that means that we have to find ways to get them. In other words, what we're going to measure is not just that they know the answer, but how to get to the answer in a consistent, logical way. That, for example, is something that GPT right now is weak at. It's getting better. And so that's a concern. That's why you hear the experts concerned. But that, for example, right now, as we stand, would be a way to try and deal with that. Get students to articulate the method behind the answer and put more emphasis on that rather than the final answer.
Thank you. I saw Leighton giving you a round of applause for that. And I see Nadine's hand is up.
Yes, I'm just backing up what I just said a while ago. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Logical thinking, like Prof. Kaur say, is very important. I posted a logical question that I usually give to the students in their final exam to ChatGPT. It answered, but there were aspects of the response that was left out. So, like Prof. Kaur says, we need to focus on helping students to understand the steps that are important as it relates to logical thinking and deducing the answer based on that.
Thank you. I just want to say that I put some links in the chat. Just scroll up a little bit and look at the links that have been put there. One was to the UNESCO Quick Start Guide. That was the first one I put in. And some others, including the article in Faculty Focus written by Shellon, and also Nadine's article, which came out in the Gleaner. And I think maybe two other pieces of writing. So those would be quite useful, you will find. So have a look at those. And I see Leighton's hand is up, and I think that's perhaps will be the last comment or question. I don't think it's a question, though.
No, it's not a question, it's a comment. No, I think one of the struggles we have, and I've seen it I've taught here and in St. Augustine, and the struggle that I think many have is the adjustment in the assessment. We've grown lazy. That's just the truth of the matter, right? We're grown lazy. We like familiar. We like that which is easy. And so we design systems that make it easy for us to assess rather than actually putting in the work. To measure critical thinking requires work. It requires a non-standardized approach that you're suggesting that everyone looking at the same problem could describe it differently, and you now have the challenge of assessing each of them individually. That's the hard part. And I think for many of us, we are too lazy. We don't want to go through all that work. We just want something very, very clear-cut. And I've seen it way too many times. I personally I find it very boring to read the same answer from 30, 40 students. That's very prescriptive. So I prefer an open-ended situation to find how they actually think. And then they're measured according to that rather than giving me exactly what the textbook said. Because if all you're doing is regurgitating the information, it just simply means you're good at reciting. And That's not what we're trying to measure here. We're trying to measure learning. So I think that adjustment is needed in the terms of the staff side of things in order to measure the changes that are needed in that sense. I think it can.
I thank you so much, Leighton, and that is so true. And you hit the nail on the head when you said that we have become quite complacent, quite lazy with the kinds of assessments that we do. And this is where that challenge lies in us having to change the kinds of assessment that lean more to alternative and assessment type activities for our students. There is a comment in the chat that says we need to take this on a wider UE platform, widen the discussion. And I do agree. We know that there are pockets of discussions going on and will continue to go on. But as the university leads in this aspect, we will definitely need to widen that scope. We have to begin thinking even more seriously and reflecting upon our practices, where we are coming from, where we intend to go, and how we use these generative tools, generative artificial intelligence tools in our routine activities in the teaching and learning context. So I'm going to allow Dr. Mackenzie to wrap it up for us, but let me just squeeze my 2-cent piece in. Thank you very much for coming out, and we will continue to get to understand what this is. We will demystify, we will research, we will produce, we will extend the discussion as we continue to look at artificial intelligence in the teaching and learning context, looking at the good, the bad, and the ugly. So, Dr. Mackenzie.
Thank you, Michelle, and panelists and attendees. I want to thank you really, really very much for taking 2 hours out of your time today to be here. And I hope that everyone got more than a mouthful from this. We know, as Michelle said, that, we covered quite a bit of ground. We went for breadth today rather than depth, but we intend to follow up with other presentations, other discussions, workshops, whatever the form that it's going to take. We will work through that. And I just want to thank also Dr. Chisholm for his input, not only just his little, not the welcome today at all. There's a lot of work that went on in the background to get this going. And also Mr. Damian Facey of Settle. So I want to thank this small team that got, I think, quite a bit of work done here. And we will try to share, well, certainly Dr. Perkins's presentation will be on the on Settle's YouTube, and we will have a discussion with others to see what we are able to post from their presentations. I had one question for Dr. Anglin. I wonder if I can steal a little time here just because I'm one of the chairs. Dr. Anglin, if you're still there, could you just say quickly where you expect the AIA, the act out of the EU, what direction you think that will take? Just quickly,
well,
if you are able.
It's going to be similar to what we're seeing now with the other, the precursor kind of data protection regulations. It is going to cause us to start thinking about how we actually use these technologies in a more specific way. So, for example, right now we haven't even discussed how we anonymize research data in a really serious way. I mean, I know we're talking about generative AI, but we really have to start thinking as the education community about the privacy aspect, because that has been missing in the discussion. So I think that's going to push us in that direction.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anglin. Okay, so as our dear Leighton said earlier, we have taken you beyond lunchtime, and we didn't have any virtual lunch to offer. But thank you again for being here, and we will continue our discussions. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Have a good
Same
day,
to you.
And
colleagues.
everyone, thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you,
Okay,
thank
take care,
you.
bye-bye.
Have a great day.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Mike is having curry.